Death came before the dawn. The screams had long faded, but the echo of them clung to Iana's bones like ash. By the time the sun rose, her father's body lay still beneath the cedar tree, and the smoke of their burned lodge curled into the pale morning like a final prayer. No one sang for him. No one stayed. The tribe scattered like frightened birds, and Iana, 28 and newly orphaned, stood barefoot in the blackened dirt with the taste of loss in her mouth. They said she brought misfortune. That wherever she walked, rain turned to storm and laughter turned to silence. It had started long before that night. Whispers carried through the campfires, too quiet to be accused, too loud to be ignored. She had learned to look away when people spoke her name, to keep her hands busy and her eyes still. When her betrothed, Håkon, left her for another, she did not cry. She simply untied the beaded cord from her wrist, the one he'd given her as promise, and let it fall into the river. It drifted away without resistance, like everything else in her life. By the third sunrise, she was gone from the valley. The wind followed her into the plains, carrying only the rhythm of hooves and the brittle sound of her breath. For days she rode without direction, through dust that seemed to have forgotten color. Hunger came and went. Sleep did not. She spoke to no one. She listened only to the sound of her horse and the far-off cry of coyotes. When she reached the edges of Tumble Creek, she was a shadow with eyes. The town barely noticed her arrival. Men at the saloon door looked her way, and then looked away again. Children pointed until their mothers pulled their hands down. She had crossed into a place where she did not belong, too native for the settlers, too displaced to return home. Work came quietly, in small, tired ways. A tailor with bad eyesight hired her to mend seams and patch coats. She took the job without words, sitting by the window with a needle and thread that felt like borrowed purpose. Her fingers bled often, but she didn't mind. Blood was honest. It meant she was still alive. The days passed in slow rhythm, the scrape of scissors, the sigh of fabric, the whisper of wind through cracked glass. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the windowpane, a woman who looked both young and ancient. Her skin carried the color of the earth, her eyes the hue of rivers after rain. She was not what the men in town called beautiful. They liked bright things, fragile things. She had learned to keep her light hidden. Then, one evening, the door creaked open, and the storm walked in wearing a torn coat. The man who entered didn't fill the room with noise, only with presence. He was a cowboy, tall, weather-beaten, the kind of man whose silence spoke louder than most people's words. His name, he later said, was Silas. He looked at her the way some people look at a sunrise they hadn't expected to find, uncertain, reverent, and slightly afraid. He needed his coat mended. She took it from him, eyes lowered, hands steady. As she sewed, she could feel his gaze resting on her, not in hunger but curiosity. When she finished, he thanked her, voice low and careful, like a man unused to gentleness. He returned the next week, and the week after. Sometimes with a coat, sometimes just a jar of coffee beans or a few words about the weather. Iana never asked why. She listened when he spoke, and when he didn't, she listened to the quiet between them. The town noticed. Whispers followed them, an unlikely pair, the lost woman and the lonely drifter. Iana ignored it. Silas seemed not to hear. There was something in his patience that unsettled her. The way he never asked, never looked through her. He simply saw her. One night, after he left, she sat before the cracked mirror hanging near the window. The glass was warped, splitting her reflection into fragments. In it, she saw what others saw, a woman weathered by loss, too plain, too strange, too much of everything and not enough of what they wanted. She touched the edge of her cheek, tracing the faint scar that ran like a river beneath her eye. "I'm not beautiful enough," she whispered. Her voice was so soft the wind almost stole it. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains. The first drops of rain tapped against the roof like cautious footsteps. She closed her eyes and waited for the storm to pass, but it didn't. It grew louder, heavy, relentless, wild, until it filled the room like a heartbeat she could no longer ignore. Through the blur of rain on glass, a shadow moved, a man standing outside, hat in hand, soaked to the bone. Silas. He didn't knock. He simply waited, his face half lit by lightning, as if the storm itself had brought him there. Iana's breath caught. For a moment, she thought the thunder was speaking her name. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached for the door. The latch lifted. And the storm stepped in. He didn't come back the next morning. By noon, his horse was found grazing near the Black Ridge, riderless, the saddle slick with dried blood. Someone in town said outlaws had struck a ranch west of the creek. Another swore they'd seen Silas fighting them off alone. None knew the truth, but Iana felt it before they spoke. Loss had a sound she recognized, a hollow ringing inside the ribs. She left the sewing shop without a word. The wind was sharp, the kind that carried omens. Her hands shook as she packed herbs and cloth into a worn satchel. People stared as she mounted her horse, the same quiet judgment in their eyes. The cursed woman riding into another ruin. She didn't look back. The prairie stretched before her, endless and unforgiving, but she pressed on, the reins trembling in her hands. The plains were a song of ghosts. Every gust of wind whispered Silas's name, each echo of hooves a heartbeat too far ahead to catch. When she finally found him, the sun had long fallen. He lay near the ravine, half covered in mud, the breath shallow in his chest. For a moment she froze, watching the rise and fall of his body. Then instinct took over. She slid to the ground, pressing her palms against his wound. Warm blood seeped through her fingers, thick as memory. He stirred at her touch, eyes fluttering open. "Iana," he breathed, voice cracked and faint. "Why would you come?" "Because you would have come for me," she wanted to say, but the words tangled behind her teeth. Instead she whispered, "Hush now," and reached for the herbs. The scent of crushed sage filled the air, sharp and clean. The night deepened around them. The sky wept rain again, soft at first, then fierce, washing blood into the earth. She built a small fire beneath the lip of the ravine, its light trembling like a heartbeat. Silas watched her through the haze, the quiet way she worked, the steadiness of her hands. Even now, soaked and shivering, she carried herself like someone who refused to be broken. "You're hurt worse than you think," she murmured. He smiled weakly. "Been hurt worse than this." "Liar," she said, and for the first time, her voice broke through the storm like a thread of warmth. When the fire steadied, she leaned back, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The silence between them filled with the sound of rain striking rock, steady and endless. "You heard what they call me, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "The cursed one. The sorrow bringer." He didn't answer right away. His eyes traced her face, the rain streaking across her cheekbones like glass tears. "I heard," he said finally. "But I think they're blind." She looked away, jaw tightening. "They're not wrong. Every man who's stood beside me has fallen. My father. My betrothed. Now you." "Iana," he whispered, "if I fall, it won't be your doing. Some of us walk into storms because we've got nowhere else to go." She swallowed hard. The firelight flickered across his face. Pale, drawn, beautiful in its fragility. He reached for her then, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed her wrist, the smallest contact, but it burned like sunlight after winter. "You keep talking about beauty like it's something borrowed," he said softly. "You don't even see it, do you?" Her throat tightened. "Beauty is for women who are wanted." He shook his head, eyes glinting with something fierce and tender. "Beauty's for the ones who survive. You've carried pain and still look at the world like it might be kind again. That's what I see. That's what I've waited for." She wanted to laugh, to cry, to vanish into that warmth he offered, but she only sat still, watching the smoke rise between them. The words struck something buried deep, a place where she had once kept hope, locked and forgotten. The rain slowed, turning to a soft drizzle. She leaned closer, hands trembling. "You should rest. Only if you stay," he murmured. So she stayed. Through the dark hours, through the whispers of wolves far off in the distance, through the fading crackle of the fire. At some point, her head fell against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to sleep. When she woke, The dawn was breaking pale over the plains. Silas still breathed, faint but steady. The storm had passed, leaving the earth rinsed clean. Iona rose slowly, knees stiff, heart heavy with something unnamed. She turned to the east, where the horizon glowed gold and pink. For the first time, she didn't fear the light touching her face. Behind her, Silas stirred and whispered her name like a prayer. She looked back at him, eyes glistening. "I'm not beautiful enough," she said again, but the words sounded different now. Softer, uncertain, as if they no longer fit her mouth. Silas smiled, his voice barely a breath. "You're more than beautiful. You're the proof that the storm was worth surviving." Her chest tightened. She knelt beside him, pressed her forehead to his, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still. Then, from far off, a gunshot cracked through the morning. One sound, sharp, sudden, final, tearing through the quiet. Iona's eyes flew open, and the dawn bled red.